The DeKalb Historical Society. This is actually my first book talk. So this is very exciting for me to talk about the Jewish community of Atlanta, which is available wherever books are sold, but we prefer if you purchase it through the link that Marissa will provide because it purchases it directly through the museums. The best way to benefit your contribution will go exponentially more to the museum, and all authorship royalties are supporting the operations of the Bremen Museum. And let me go ahead and I'll share my presentation for today so you can see kind of a run of show what we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to give a kind of brief overview on the history of Jewish Atlanta. It'll last about 30 minutes or so. We're going to do kind of like a 30,000 foot overview of kind of the highlights of the community's history. And then we'll be talking about, we have all this amazing history, but it doesn't mean anything if nobody knows about it. So how we at the Bremen, and particularly the archives, are democratizing access to this incredible history. And the book was certainly a part of this initiative, but it's a part of a larger initiative. And I'm going to show you some other projects that we're working on to do just that. And then we'll open up to questions and answers for about like 10, 15 minutes at the end. So let's jump right in. It is so easy to forget that Atlanta was once a small frontier railroad town. And now, in the light of today, it's international metropolis that's sprawling, has millions of people living in it. But it was this little tiny frontier town that was kind of an anomaly. There's not really any major causeway to create a city. It was just chosen by surveyors as the first piece of flat land south of the mountains to connect railroads. And so you can see this map here on the left. Both the map and the image are from 1864. This actually was created by surveyors during the Civil War. Of course, we all know what happened that same year as Sherman came to town. And so this is a really good representation of what Atlanta was like and right before its destruction during the Civil War. But you can see these three major railroads, the Georgia, the Macon, and the Atlantic Railroad. That's actually what Atlanta got its name from, the Atlantic Railroad. And so these three railroads connected the rest of the state of Georgia with the rest of the country. And so all these raw goods from the state were coming through this choke point in Atlanta and bringing entrepreneurial trailblazers. And so even though Atlanta was kind of late to the game, it was incorporated in 1845, by the Civil War, it had become the economic engine of the Confederacy. And that's what made it such a prized target for Union forces. And of course, Sherman came to town, and in the Battle of Atlanta ensued and initiated his march to the sea, which was the death knell for the Confederacy. But those same forces that existed before the Civil War that turned Atlanta into this boom town existed after the Civil War and led to this resurgence. Atlanta's seal is a phoenix rising from the ashes, and it's this resurgence that Atlanta is coined with because those same forces existed that created this boom before the Civil War and that created another boom afterwards. So how did Jews wind up in towns like Atlanta? These are frontier towns. They're not on port. They're not port. It's not a port city. It's not where immigrants are coming to. They have to actually venture inland to get to a frontier town like Atlanta. Well, one of the ways was through peddling. Peddling was a very common profession for Jewish immigrants. When they arrived at a port city, a fellow member of the Jewish community or fellow immigrant would front them some goods, and they would go door to door and sell those goods. Here you can see, for example, here's Felix Shavinsky in Birmingham. You would start out on foot, and once you saved up enough money, you could get a bike. And once you saved up even more money, you could be like Teddy Blumenthal here in North Georgia and get a horse and buggy. And eventually, once you saved up enough capital and you found a town that was hospitable enough, then you would create a storefront, a brick and mortar storefront. And typically what you peddled is the industry that you went into. So if you peddled rags, you went into the textile business. If you peddled scrap metal, you went into the iron business. If you peddled dry goods, you went into the department store business. And as we'll learn, some of these businesses that started from peddlers grew into major players in their respective industries. Another way that people, Jewish immigrants, found their way to the South was through the Galveston movement. This was a effort initiated by a Jewish entrepreneur in New York named Jacob Schiff and a rabbi in Galveston, Texas named Rabbi Henry Cohen. And they saw the need to redirect Jewish immigrants from New York to other parts of the country. And so Galveston, which is called the Ellis Island of the South, received roughly 10,000 Jews in the early 20th century. And so that redirected Jews to this part of the country. You can see Galveston connected to this network, transportation network, and here is Atlanta. So there are also this method of winding up in towns like Atlanta throughout the region. Now, the first semblance of a Jewish community in many of these frontier towns, including Atlanta, was the creation of burial societies. Typically, they weren't forming congregations or Jewish community centers because they just didn't have the numbers. They didn't have the resources. But when a member of the community died, as a member, this is a time when healthcare wasn't what it was. Life expectancy was a lot shorter. So some member of the community died. They wanted to make sure that they were buried in kosher ground and consecrated ground. And so the first semblance of a Jewish community in Atlanta was the Hebrew Benevolent Society. And they banded together to purchase a plot of land at Oakland Cemetery. It still exists today. It's the old Jewish section. And what's really remarkable about this plot is that you can see that they follow Jewish law. And Jewish law requires that the Jewish plot in a cemetery be walled off from the rest of the sections. And also at the time of its purchase, Oakland has since expanded, but at the time of its purchase, it was the closest plot to Jerusalem. It was in the southeast corner. Now this plot is one of 3 Jewish sections at the cemetery, and it's a beautiful, beautiful cemetery. If you've never been to Oakland, it's one of like 3 Victorian garden cemeteries in the country. So you can go visit those different sections. So by the time of the Civil War, Jews made up 1% of the population, but 10% of the businesses in town. And after the Civil War, that was true as well. They were very affluent in business. I want to highlight a few of those. For example, H. Silverman Company was one of the largest tobacco emporiums in Atlanta. They actually owned a corner in 5 Points. And I love this picture because it's they had a Baby Lions promotion. They were going to buy the lions, but they were too expensive, so they wound up renting them, which I think was probably a wise decision. You don't want to hang on to lions very long. I don't think after they become babies, they get a lot bigger. Rich's department store was founded by a Hungarian Jewish immigrant who peddled his way to Atlanta, opened this dry goods store that turned into Rich's department store, and it grew into the largest department store in the Southeast. And they helped start WABE, Atlanta's NPR station, the Dogwood Festival. And as we'll learn later on, there was an instance during the Civil Rights Movement that it played an important role in the reshaping of Atlanta and the country. Jacobs Pharmacy, the first place to sell Coca-Cola. It was owned by Joseph Jacobs, and he was approached by Dr. Pemberton to sell his new elixir. And actually, Joseph Jacobs owned a large share of Coca-Cola, but he fell on some hard times. One of his warehouses burned down, and he wound up selling his shares to Asa Candler, who wound up making millions on the Coca-Cola Company. And we actually have in our archives a memoir that was written by Joseph Jacobs, how he won and lost an interest in Coca-Cola. So he certainly regretted that, but his business was successful nonetheless. It wound up selling to Revco Drug Company after World War II. And Fulton Bag and Cotton Mill was also founded by a German Jewish immigrant, Jacob Elsis. We actually have his great-great-grandson on the call today. He lives in Cabbagetown and actually in the old Fulton Bag and Cotton Mill lofts, the stack lofts. And what's significant about this business is that it grew into the largest employer in Atlanta by the turn of the 20th century. And its founder, Jacob Elsis, helped found Georgia Tech. He needed engineers for his mill, and actually his son, Oscar Elsis, was the third student enrolled at Georgia Tech. So we're talking about very significant pillars and icons in Atlanta: Coca-Cola, Georgia Tech, WABE, and the list goes on. Other contributions in early Atlanta: the first nonprofit in the state of Georgia, the Hebrew Orphans Home, was founded in 1889. And this was a time when there wasn't a federal, state, or local safety net for those that are less fortunate. It was up to the religious communities to take care of their own. And that's what the Jewish community did. And what's significant about the story is that there was a contest by the cities in the Southeast to which city could raise the most money would have the Hebrew Orphans Home. And Atlanta raised $60,000 overnight to show the opulence and the success of this early Jewish community. And this organization still exists today. It's not an orphanage. It's now the Jewish Educational Loan Fund, and they provide interest-free loans to college students. So the first nonprofit in the state of Georgia. Joseph Hirsch was the city councilman who spearheaded the creation of Henry Grady Memorial Hospital, which is now one of the largest healthcare systems in the country. And Victor Kriegshauer was the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and he launched a campaign that lured Emory University to Atlanta. And actually, if you've been to the Wrecking Bar in Little Five Points, you've been in his house. He was a builder by profession, and he built that house. So, the list goes on. Henry Grady Memorial Hospital, oldest nonprofit in the state of Georgia, Emory University. Now, the biggest shift in Atlanta's Jewish landscape didn't even happen in Atlanta. It happened overseas. It happened in Russia. We have this butterfly effect, cause and effect. There was a new czar in town, and he enacted the May laws that led to Cossacks raiding shtetls in this kind of Fiddler on the Roof story. And that led to a mass exodus of Jews from Eastern Europe to America and settling in towns like Atlanta. And when these Eastern European Jews came to Atlanta, they were like oil and water with the existing Jewish community. The existing Jewish community that came over in the late 1800s were from Central Europe and German speaking. And they had already had a couple of generations to assimilate, to become affluent in the greater community in politics and business and social life. And so when the Eastern European Jews arrived, they're very Orthodox, they keep kosher, they don't open their businesses on the Sabbath. And so there's a cultural, generational wealth gap between these two communities. And this map that we have from 1946 very clearly illustrates this division within the Jewish community. And a lot of times people think, oh, the Jewish community, it's all the same. But there's actually quite a lot of diversity within the Jewish community, and even in Atlanta. So this pocket here on the north side of town, this is Piedmont Park. So this pocket north of Ponce de Leon Avenue were the more affluent Central European descent members of the Jewish community that belonged to the Temple, the oldest Jewish congregation in Atlanta. And this pocket down here, south of Ponce, this here is Grant Park. This is People's Town. This is Mechanicsville. This is downtown. Up here is Virginia Highland and Morningside, Ponce Highland. This pocket down here were the Eastern European Jews that were, first or second generation immigrants living in more modest urban dwellings. And so they formed their own congregations, they formed their own social groups. If you've ever heard of The Last Night at Ballyhoo, the play written by Alfred Urey, who talks about this division in that play. Actually, that play is part of a trilogy, the most famous of which is Driving Miss Daisy, which won an Oscar. And Alfred Urey is the only person to have won the Triple Crown, which is Driving Miss Daisy, which is the Tony Award, the Pulitzer, and the Academy Award for Driving Miss Daisy. But also the third one, besides Last Night at Ballyhoo, is Parade, which is about the Leo Frank case, which we'll learn about in just a second. But The Last Night at Ballyhoo is all about this division in the community and these intra-ethnic prejudices when a girl of Central European descent wants to take a boy from Eastern European descent to this dance called Ballyhoo and all of the issues that sparks in her family. Now, I kind of define Atlanta's Jewish history by 3 booms and 3 busts. The 3 booms being economic booms that led to a proliferation of Jewish life. So the first boom is after the Civil War, the second boom is after the Civil Rights Movement, and the third boom is after the Olympics. But there's also 3 busts, the 3 instances of anti-Semitism that were made national headlines, even international headlines. The first one being the lynching of Leo Frank in 1915. Leo Frank was a Jewish businessman from New York. He came down to Atlanta to work at his uncle's factory, the National Pencil Factory. A little girl named Mary Fagan was found dead in the basement of the factory, and Leo Frank was the last person to admit to seeing her alive. He was sentenced to death by hanging. It went all the way, his appeals went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, where it was upheld 7-2. The two dissenters' arguments are now common law. They argued that he did not get a fair trial because of all the anti-Semitism that took place surrounding the trial and public opinion against Leo Frank. He kind of became the poster child for everything wrong with the New South, of this industrialization, of child labor, and of urbanization. And even though he was sentenced to death, the governor of Georgia stepped in and saw the injustice, commuted his sentence to life in prison. Unfortunately, it was very much so during lynch law, during Jim Crow and lynch law, and several influential members of the Atlanta greater community, particularly from Marietta, which is where Mary Fagan's family was from, conspired, abducted him from prison, drove him to Marietta, and lynched him outside of town. And this was really the first major instance of anti-Semitism in the Atlanta Jewish community. And it was a traumatizing event. It led to the community really going and withdrawing, and no member of the Jewish community ran for public office for over 15 years following the lynching. The next major instance of anti-Semitism is a temple bombing. You see over here Rabbi Rothschild next to Mayor Hartsfield. Rabbi Rothschild came to Atlanta from Pittsburgh and immediately saw the injustices taking place in a Jim Crow segregated South, and became outspoken for civil rights. And Leo Frank was a member of the temple, and people remembered the lynching and were very hesitant and approached Rabbi Rothschild like, we're going to have another instance like Leo Frank if you continue to rock the boat. And it did lead to an instance of anti-Semitism, the temple bombing in 1958. And then also during that same time is the Emory Dental School scandal, when we had a anti-Semitic dean of the dental school who expelled a majority of the Jewish students. Now, each of these instances of anti-Semitism, I could do entire presentations on each. I have done entire presentations on each of them, and there are books written about them. But what I want to focus on is the aftermath of each of these, because that is what shaped Atlanta and the Jewish community that we know today. So the aftermath of the Leo Frank case is the outpouring of anti-Semitism, and also the rebanding of the Ku Klux Klan. The lynchers and lynch party called for the rebanding of the Ku Klux Klan, which they did in November, just a few months after the lynching. They rebanded on top of Stone Mountain. And this time they were not a fraternal organization. They were now a hate group. It also spurred and led to the growth of the Anti-Defamation League, which still exists today and combats hatred in all forms. So the KKK, ADL, kind of operating on opposite sides of the pendulum, and still both of these groups are very active today. So we're talking about national implications. And then in the letter on the left is a letter to Adolph Ox, who's the publisher of the New York Times. And he had a cousin in Atlanta, and she wrote, "Please stop publishing about the Leo Frank case. You know, we don't want to pursue the lynchers. We just want this to go away." And so that represents with the community withdrawing into itself and working hard to hide its Jewish heritage and assimilate as much as possible into the community. Now, some people bookend the Leo Frank case with the temple bombing, ironically, because there was an opposite effect during the temple bombing. There was an outpouring of support for the Jewish community following the bombing. And a large part of that has to do with Mayor Hartsfield, who was one of the few progressive leaders in Atlanta. At the time, Georgia at the state level was, the governor was Eugene Talmadge. One of the senators was Lester Maddox. These were folks that said that they wanted to close businesses rather than integrate, close schools rather than integrate. But Mayor Hartsfield coined Atlanta as a city too busy to hate. And I think that he should be credited with Atlanta taking off in a way that other cities didn't. Like Birmingham was actually larger at the time, but because it had more prejudice, more intolerance at levels of government, Atlanta took off in ways that Birmingham didn't. And I want to play, this is the live broadcast that he did from the scene of the bombing.
Atlanta has always been a lighthouse of racial and religious tolerance in the South. And we are shocked and amazed that this awful thing could happen in our midst. And we prefer to believe that it is the work of people outside of our city. We have brought every resource of law enforcement to bear. We have offered rewards, and we hope that the perpetrators of this thing will be apprehended. But my friends, here you see the end result of bigotry and intolerance. And whether they like it or not, those who practice rabble-rousing and demagoguery are the godfathers of the cross burners and the dynamite.
So he's calling out these political leaders that are demagogues, that are populist and rabble-rousers, and saying this is the direct result of your rhetoric. And so this led to actually the temple at the time was undergoing a capital campaign, and they raised twice what they needed for the capital campaign almost overnight, people sending in dollar bills from around the country. So this has actually been coined the bomb that healed, because it helped heal some of those old wounds that were created by the Leo Frank case. And some people also bookend Emory's apology for the anti-Semitism that took place at his dental school during the 1950s and 40s and 50s. This apology didn't come until 2012, but some people bookend this with the Leo Frank case, and I want to play the apology for you so you can hear it in person.
On behalf of Emory University, serving as its president, I hereby express in the deepest and strongest terms Emory's regret for the anti-Semitic practices of the dental school during those years. We at Emory also regret that it has taken this long for those events to be properly acknowledged. I am sorry. We are sorry. Stanley Perry Brickman, distinguished oral surgeon, community leader, and maker of Emory history. By your example of intellectual engagement and ethical integrity, you have extended the reach of the ennobling power of an excellent mind and a generous heart. By your association with Emory University, you have made its heritage shine more brightly and have made its name more worthy of renown. Thank you, and congratulations.
The events that led to the apology were actually spurred by Dr. Perry Brickman. He was one of those students that was expelled from the Emory Dental School because of his heritage. There was an exhibition at Emory where that graph that I showed you was on display, and he saw that and he said, wow, I had no idea that this was a systemic issue. And so he started doing research and interviewing fellow classmates that were expelled, and created a documentary called From Silence to Recognition. And this spurred Emory to apologize, and to get any major university to apologize for anything is obviously a very significant event. He actually just published a book all about it called Extracted, the systemic anti-Semitism in higher education. So if you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend that you check out his book. We actually had him speak as part of our speaker series surrounding the release of the book a couple of weeks ago, and it was really amazing. Now, even though the apology didn't take place until 2012, the systemic anti-Semitism that took place in the dental school was in the civil rights era. And I want to go back to the civil rights era because it was such a pivotal moment for Atlanta's history, and the Jewish community played a significant role on both sides of the civil rights movement. I want to mention some of the activists in the Jewish community. The first I want to mention is the fellow dentists of Perry Brickman, Doctors Irving and Marvin Goldstein. They purchased a hotel in Midtown, the Peachtree Manor Hotel, and they were going to turn it into their dental practice, but they realized it wasn't quite right for a dental practice, and so they decided to keep it as a hotel, and became the first integrated hotel in Atlanta Actually, they were the first integrated dental practice in Atlanta too, and members of the Black community traveled throughout the region to be treated by them. They also treated civil rights leaders and their children, including the King family. With the success of the Peachtree Manor Hotel, they decided to build the American Motor Hotel in downtown Atlanta, which was the first hotel to be built in downtown in over 40 years. So it was a pretty significant event. And they were going to integrate the hotel, but they were even approached by Mayor Ivan Allen Jr. to integrate the hotel because he wanted the Milwaukee Braves to move to Atlanta, and he needed an integrated hotel close to the ballpark. That was part of the MLB regulations that they didn't want to split up teams. So you had to have an integrated hotel for visiting teams to stay in. And the hotel served as a meeting point for civil rights leaders. It's amazing. Today it exists as the DoubleTree by Hilton, and they recently did a multi-million-dollar renovation, paying homage to this amazing history. Both the Lovable Brazier Company and Pryor Tire Company were Jewish-owned businesses that integrated their workforces long before the civil rights era. We're talking about in the 1930s and 1940s. And both of the business owners, the Goldstein family, Leon and Abe of Pryor Tire, and the Garson family at Lovable Brazier Company were very active in the Jewish community and very active in the civil rights movement. This is juxtaposed with members of the Jewish community that were more traditional, business owners that were more reluctant to integrate their businesses because they thought that they would alienate their white clientele, and they were kind of following the lead of other businesses, similar businesses in Atlanta and the region. Even though Rich's department store, which I mentioned earlier, founded in 1867 and had grown into the largest department store in the Southeast. A lot of people remember Rich's if they lived here before 2000, before it came Macy's. Very synonymous with Atlanta and its landscape. Rich's was very forward thinking in a lot of ways. They allowed members of the Black community to purchase on credit. They also had dressing rooms for members of the Black community. And when a lot of other department stores said you could buy but not try. Despite being progressive in those means, they also had segregated eateries in their flagship downtown store, the Magnolia Tea Room and the Crystal Bridge Cafe. And because Rich's was this icon, synonymous with Atlanta, it was targeted by the sit-in movement and by civil rights era leaders like Martin Luther King, who was arrested at Rich's during one of these sit-in protests on October 19th, 1960. Now, the significance of this arrest is that some historians argue that because Martin Luther King was arrested in October of 1960, that John F. Kennedy was elected president the following month. Actually, there was a book that just came out called 9 Days by Paul Kendrick that's all about this. And they argue this because John F. Kennedy's campaign, through some back channels, including members of the Jewish community, Morris Abram particularly, they were able to get Martin Luther King released from prison. He was held on some priors. Because of this accomplishment, they sent what was called the Blue Bomb. It was a blue pamphlet to all the Black churches in the South and said, look, John F. Kennedy's campaign said something and did something, and Nixon didn't do anything. Vote for John F. Kennedy. And at a time when the Black vote was typically for the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, this helped sway a number of voters over to John F. Kennedy. And he wound up winning the election by around 1 million votes, so a very tight election. And so if Martin Luther King wasn't arrested at Rich's, who knows if we would have ever had Camelot, or maybe Nixon would have blown up the world during the Cuban Missile Crisis or something. Another story I want to share is a cautionary tale. Leb's Restaurant. It was owned by Charlie Lebanon. It was located across the street from the Rialto Theater. It's now a landmark diner. He put an ad in the newspapers saying, "You are celebrating 13 years in Atlanta. Come one, come all." Well, the issue was that he was a segregated eatery. And so when the Black community showed up, he refused to serve them. And this led to a slew of sit-ins and protests at his restaurant. And he refused to integrate for months. It wasn't until the 1964 Civil Rights Act that he decided to integrate. And he was afraid that he was being unfairly targeted and that, other eateries had not integrated. So why should he? And he thought, he was going to lose his clientele. Well, he ended up losing his clientele anyways because of all the bad publicity, and his business wound up going under. And so it's a shame because apparently he had the best deli in town, the best pickles. But it's a cautionary tale to be on the right side of history, because you'll wind up losing your business either way. Now, following the civil rights movement, integration, and also air conditioning, that's a really important thing to note too in the South, we see a boom. As I mentioned, there's those three booms: after the Civil War, after the Civil Rights, and after the Olympics. So after the Civil Rights movement, we see the Jewish community quadruple between 1970 and 1990. And this leads to a proliferation of Jewish organizations that cater to all aspects of life. This is when we get the first Jewish day schools, the first home for the aged, the first overnight summer camps. And we also have a new generation of entrepreneurs. The shining example of that is the Home Depot, which was founded by Bernie Marcus and Arthur Blank, and has grown into an international company. And of course, their foundations have contributed billions of dollars to Atlanta and its landscape and its Jewish community. Arthur Blank owns the Atlanta Falcons, Atlanta United, the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Bernie Marcus created the Georgia Aquarium, the Marcus Autism Research Center. So very influential and impactful members of the community. And Home Depot is a household name. This is also when we see Jewish politicians re-enter community service in mass for the first time since Leo Frank. That's when we get the first Jewish congressman, Elliot Levitas, who served in the House of Representatives for a decade. That's when we have the first Jewish mayor of Atlanta, Sam Massell. And we have folks like Kathy Steinberg and Sidney Marcus run for local office. Now, of course, kind of the thesis of the book and the thesis of this presentation is that as Atlanta has grown from this small little railroad town into this international city, that the Jewish community has contributed every step along the way. And the most iconic thing that an international city can do is host the Olympics, which Atlanta was awarded in 1996. Well, the Jewish story behind the Olympics is that the International Olympic Committee had never formally recognized the slaying of the Israeli athletes during the 1972 Olympics and that terrorist attack. The Jewish community here lobbied the IOC to finally recognize this tragedy and actually brought over the surviving family members of these Israeli athletes, dedicated a memorial, did public outreach, and it led to this moment during the closing ceremony.
While we celebrate the success of these games, we do not forget the tragic bomb explosion of last week. Nor do we forget the victims, their families and friends. And also, we have in our minds the tragedy of Munich, where 11 Israeli athletes were killed during the Olympic Games in 1972. No act of terrorism has ever destroyed the Olympic movement, and none ever will.
He goes on to hold a moment of silence for the victims, and the moment of silence is broken by Stevie Wonder playing "Imagine" by John Lennon. It's a really, really powerful moment, and the fact that this Jewish community was able to lobby a very powerful international body to formally recognize a really dark mark on its history is a significant moment and shows the influence of this Jewish community and how it's grown into this international force. Now, this third boom following the Olympics, the Olympics brings in so much capital to cities, and you see this massive expansion. It really propelled the Atlanta community, the Jewish community, into the 21st century. And we've seen, just like after integration, a proliferation of Jewish organizations catering to all aspects of life. We've seen a outcropping of different festivals, music festival, life festival, and the film festival, which has grown into the largest film festival in Atlanta and the largest Jewish film festival in the world. Diverse organizations like Sojourn, who work on LGBTQ Jews and furthering their rights. And also, most recently, John Ossoff becoming the first Jewish senator from the state of Georgia. I've been joking that my book came out in January and he won the election, and my book is already outdated. But I think that's just so indicative of the fact that this Jewish community is constantly contributing and always adding to this narrative. I want to talk for a second about the demographics of Atlanta today, because I think this is important for the work that we're doing at the Bremen Museum. So it's important to note that over 80% of the Jewish community in Atlanta was born outside of Atlanta. It's talking about this transient community coming here during these economic booming opportunities. I'm one of those people. I came here for work, settled here in 2013. And over almost 60% of the Jewish community is not connected to any Jewish organization. So how do we connect this very transient, transplant Jewish community to its history and to other Jewish organizations? Well, at the Bremen Museum, we think that's through Jewish history, culture, and arts. That is our mission, to connect people to those things. And we do this through a several-pronged approach. We have a Weinberg Center for Holocaust Education that welcomes tens of thousands of school students every year to learn about the Holocaust and meet with local survivors who tell their stories, through our archives, which is the largest repository for Jewish history in the Southeast. And we have 3 gallery spaces and an auditorium where we hold rotating exhibitions that focus on Jewish contribution to Atlanta and to the region, Holocaust history, and our auditorium we use for all sorts of different programs. Now, the archives is extensive, and this is where I pulled the images for this book. There's 200 images in the book, and the vast majority of them come from our archives. It documents the rich history of not just Atlanta, but the region, dating back to colonial America, from the Jewish community in Savannah that settled in 1733, up until things that we collected from John Ossoff's campaign. We actually, just last week, I picked up the Bible that he was sworn in on that belonged originally to Rabbi Jacob Rothschild, a very active civil rights leader. So collecting until the present day, we in the archives work hard, even during the pandemic, to collect this history. And we had a record number of public programs last year that reached a record number of people. And we also had a record number of web traffic. And a big part of that is through our various initiatives. So the book that brought us all here today was actually one of 2 books that we published last year. The other book is an anthology of the history of the temple, the oldest congregation in Atlanta. They recently celebrated their 150th anniversary, and this book chronicles that remarkable history and draws heavily from the archives. It features not only images, but images of artifacts and scans of documents that tell the amazing story of this congregation and the people in this congregation that contributed to not just the Jewish community, but the greater community as well. We also have an extensive amount of programs. We just concluded a 6-week speaker series that was in conjunction with the release of the book. It reached 1,000 people. And each week we spoke with scholars in the fields on their respective topics. So we talked about Leo Frank. We talked about the Emory Dental School scandal. We talked about riches, Jewish women activists, the old Jewish neighborhood that existed in Peoplestown, Mechanicsville, and Georgia Avenue. So it was a really fun series that we look forward to doing more of those types of programs and sharing this rich history to a virtual audience, and eventually we'll go back to in-person as well. We also have been doing a lot recently on our online dissemination. I want to share some of this with you. So we recently overhauled our entire collection catalog system to industry standard, and actually in one instance, industry leading. Make sure y'all can see this. Okay, y'all should be able to see now this. So this is our new oral history catalog system. In the past, oral histories were cataloged in a very rudimentary fashion. Researchers were presented with rough transcripts, raw media, but now through our new oral history catalog system, we can show the media, and we have media dating back to the 70s and 80s and 90s that were shot with just audio. We have video in standard definition. We now are shooting in high definition. So let's click on one of these oral histories. Frances Bunzel, for example, she was a Holocaust survivor who came to Atlanta, settled here, and made a massive impact on the community through her activism, volunteerism, and philanthropy. So now researchers are presented with the media alongside descriptive information about the memorist. They also have a time-stamped index that they can scroll along the right side, or they can even hover over these different flashpoints in the media. They can click on a particular term, the temple bombing,
Yes.
and hear her talk
I
about this
was
term.
teaching Sunday school at that time, but on this particular Sunday, I wasn't in town. I was on a conference with my husband.
What's also really significant about this system is that it also has a timestamp transcript. So this is groundbreaking. It makes media text searchable. I can search across the entire resource for particular terms, jump right to that point in the interview. I can search across the entire oral history collection and see which media, which oral histories have that term mentioned, and go right to that particular term. One other cool thing that we're doing is we're also we're adding annotations. So particularly with our oral histories, which are mention things like B'nai B'rith or the Council of Jewish Women. These are terms that not everyone may be familiar with because they're specific to the Jewish community. So we can add further context. Now, this system is really, really cool on its own, but we've taken it one step further. We're one of 2 archives in the country. It's us and Yale University. Johns Hopkins is about to become the 3rd that have integrated aviary or oral history catalog system with ArchivesSpace. And ArchivesSpace is the industry leading collection catalog system in the archives field. So whether researchers are working in ArchivesSpace or aviary, they can find these records and link to them. And what the reason we wanted to sync this over to ArchivesSpace is because ArchivesSpace is being harvested at a statewide level by the Digital Library of Georgia. And we're also looking into ways to share this with national and international organizations like OCLC and WorldCat. And ArchivesSpace is cool on its own. This is where we keep all of our manuscript content. So I'll type in Holocaust, for example. You see all these different family papers, and there you can click in and see their inventory. Some of these are even digitized down to the item level. So here's the Reuben and Lola Lansky family papers. This is a collection we've digitized down to the item level. So if someone were to come here and, oh, I'm interested in seeing Laud's Ghetto paper money, I can click into the PDF and see every single piece of paper that's in this file. So this is a researcher's dream. And one other really cool thing I want to show you about aviary is that we are part of a flock in aviary, a collective focused on Holocaust survivor testimonies. So you can see us here alongside Yale's Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust Testimony and Illinois Institute of Technology. So we're really excited. We have about 200 oral histories that are already in the system. We have hundreds more that are going in. We just started migrating to this a few months ago. And so we're very, very excited to continue to, and we see much broader application for not just oral histories, but all sorts of media projects. We have AV collections that span hundreds of linear feet. And so we want to get this material into aviary, into our oral history catalog system, and make it text searchable. Another really cool thing that we've done is we partnered with Google to create an arts and culture page. So here is the soft launch of the Atlanta page. You can see the High Museum of Art, GPB, the King Center, SCAD-FASH, Jimmy Carter Presidential Library, Atlanta History Center, and here's the Bremen Museum. So we click on our soft launch of our page. Visitors can click on their social media and share it with their friends and family. You can learn more about the Bremen Museum and who we are. Here is an online exhibition that we created all about Atlanta's Jewish history. You'll see some of the same imagery that I used for my presentation, and folks can easily click through and learn about this community's history with imagery and text to go alongside it. Our hard launch is going to have several more exhibitions, It's also going to have several hundred more items. So what's cool about this, the items make up the exhibition. So we upload the items, we use the items to create the exhibitions and the narratives. You can arrange these items by popularity. You can organize them in a timeline. And this is all high resolution imaging. You have all the descriptive metadata. All these items go into a cache of items from all over the arts and culture platform. So when other institutions are adding items to their exhibitions, it automatically cites the Bremen Museum as the source. And this is high resolution. So this is a mess cup that was used by Henry Burnbury. He was a Holocaust survivor who came to America and then fought in World War II, was in the European campaign. And so here he inscribed his name as well as London and towns throughout Europe as he went through them and as part of the campaign. And this is so high resolution. You can literally see the little rivets in the mess cup from where he carved that information in. So really, really cool, interactive, engaging things that we're using to make our history available online, in print, through programming, every possible means to a research audience and to a public audience. Now, with that, I will open it up to questions about Atlanta's Jewish history or about our initiatives that we're undertaking with the book as part of it to increase access in highly accessible ways.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was a real excellent presentation, which has me have a list of questions that I have for you, but I wanted to see if anyone else has any questions. You can unmute yourself and ask away if you have any.
I do have a question. Marissa, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Tiffany.
Hey, Tiffany, how are you?
Hey, Jeremy. Oh my God, Jeremy.
I miss hanging out with you.
Awesome. I know, this is so awesome. Let me just tell everybody, the Bremen Museum is like so awesome. I mean, you would not believe. I have found so much. I go to the Bremen Museum, and Jeremy, you know this, for African American history, for Black history. I find so much more than you'll ever know. And so Jeremy always helps me out. He helps me find things I never even knew existed. So I would go there and just visit it. It's so amazing, and it's so packed with information. They even have the key. They even had the key where, the jail key of Leo Frank, when he was jailed at the prison, they found that key, and it's there. And that jazz museum, the jazz portrait, the portrait of jazz, those exhibits, I was able to see it before this pandemic broke out. That was the most amazing exhibit ever. It was so good.
You can see it virtually too. If you go to our website, go to our exhibition, it's all virtual. You can navigate it like a Google Street View and click on panels and pictures. So yeah, we're doing all sorts of cool things. So thanks so much, Tiffany, for the shout out. Miss helping you and seeing you. And yeah, that's what we're here for. We're here to make this.
Yeah, you guys accessible. You definitely are. And I mean, every time I come there, I get so much help and information. It lasts me for like a whole year, really.
Well, we're overdue then.
I know.
I get vaccinated tomorrow, my first dose. So let's be in touch soon.
Really? Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm doing it soon, I guess, later this year, probably.
I actually, I have a quick question. I know when you're talking about the boomtown, especially in the 1970s, I actually had it reminded me of, I recently read the story of Goldberg's Deli. And I was curious if there's any other kind of mixture of Jewish food and Southern food, especially, you know, that's such a strong indicator of a Jewish community is seeing, you know, Jewish food or bagels. And so I was wondering if there's any kind of Atlanta specific Jewish food, or that's kind of this mixture.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've thought about doing like Jewish food tours and things like that, because there has, especially recently, been an outgrowth of Jewish infusion eateries, particularly one that's kind of spearheaded by Chef Todd Ginsburg, he's featured in the book. He opened the General Mirror, which is kind of like a fusion deli, Jewish deli, Southern food It's really good. It's over at Emory Point next to the CDC. But there's also Fuego Mundo, which is near Sandy Springs, and it's actually kosher. It's South American food. It's Brazilian, Argentinian food. It's really, really good. It's like the best kosher food I've ever had. But there has been recently, and actually Todd Ginsburg owns another Middle Eastern food eatery, food stall at Krog Street Market called Yala. They do pita and shawarma and falafel. And there's another Israeli place that just opened on the west side, West Midtown. I can't remember the name of it. But there has been recently, that was kind of an issue with Atlanta for many years, I understand. Like after Led's closed, unfortunately, because of his prejudice, there was kind of this vacuum for good Jewish deli. And I know Goldberg's, they kind of filled that void, but also if you want kind of more of a higher end experience, the General Mirror is certainly that kind of higher end fusion. So we've thought about doing a Jewish food tour because there is this recent outcropping, and they're kind of spread out. So it'd be kind of hard to figure out how to get to all of them. But the land is so sprawling nowadays. But yeah, the Jewish food scene is definitely getting there. It's better than it was a generation ago. And that's part of the boom of the 21st century.
Can I mention a little something about, since we're on the topic of food, the terrible loss of the bagel palace in Toco Hills? That was really bad. So
yeah, sad. A lot of places unfortunately have come and gone. The different bagel places and delis, and yeah, unfortunately especially I think this last year has been hard for restaurants. And so I have a relationship with Todd Ginsburg, and we want to actually do an oral history with him and talk to him about how his businesses were affected by the pandemic, and see how they're doing. Yeah, it's certainly been an issue.
The Bagel Palace, I mean, that closed, I think, in 2019. And that was just a result of all of this development and the rise in rental. They just couldn't afford the rent anymore, and that's happening everywhere to small businesses. It's a big loss. I miss its matzo ball soup.
There's a good bagel place in East Atlanta Village, Emerald City Bagels.
That is good.
Yeah, that place is, and the owner has been really nice to us, and sponsored some of our events and stuff back when it was kosher to do that.
Very cool.
Jeremy, quick question. Have you run across Harold Weinstein's deli that was in downtown business district, the 80s and 90s, if not before?
No, I haven't heard of that. I could search our archives to see if we have anything, but I personally haven't heard about that. So if anybody has information, we'd love to have it.
I could put you in touch with his daughter. She's in New Jersey now, but if you could put in the chat the best way to get in touch with you.
Yeah, I'll share that with everybody in case you have follow-up questions. I'll put my email in there.
Thank you.
Looks like we have a couple more minutes for our time for a couple more questions. If anyone else has them, you can also just type it in the chat if you don't want to speak up, but you can do either.
I have one quick question. I'm from New York, biracial, and I've been here since '78, and I'm a big genealogist fan. I've been doing my family tree for about 10 years, actually more than that. There's a story that involves my great-great-great-grandfather, who was a slave and escaped when he was a teenager, that sort of thing. And then when he joined the troops, the Union troops from Illinois, the captain of that person, of the regiment, took him under his wing because he became the bugler for the group during the war. But then he took him under his wing and got him settled in Illinois, whereas, where my mother and her mother were all from Illinois, Chicago. And I have the name of that captain, and it's Meyer. And I believe I just had this feeling that he might be Jewish, and so I looked up his name, and there was a Meyer. I can't remember his first name. Anyway, my question is, could I get through your organization and through the Bremen Museum any kind of information about someone outside of Georgia?
Yeah, definitely. We are well connected with the Jewish Genealogical Society of Georgia. You know, they focus on the state, but they know how to access resources all over the country. And actually, if you become a member of the museum, you're automatically a member of the society as well. But send me an email. I can connect you with them. They are very well seasoned professional genealogists that know how to access those records. They do it all the time, and it's, you know, a lot of fun for them to kind of explore these different genealogy inquiries. And I kind of we get a lot of genealogy inquiries into the archives. And that's why I'm so excited about our new catalog system. I think it's going to spur even more genealogy and this discoverability of our collections. But I rely heavily on the folks at the JGSG and their expertise. So yeah, please reach out to me, share the information that you have about, and that's true for anyone else. If you have genealogy that you are researching and hit a brick wall or whatever, you need some help, please do reach out and I can put you in touch with the local society.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. This was a great presentation, and you know, any other opportunity we can work together again or do another presentation. Love to see a DeKalb or Decatur focused one. That would be a fun one.
Yeah.
But yeah, so thank you so much. And for those that joined late, we'll have this on our channel in a little bit, our YouTube channel, in a day or so. But thank you so much for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the DeKalb History Center for your amazing everything you do and promoting the Bremen and the book. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks,
Take care.
everyone.
Everyone, thank you.